I'm thrilled you guys are here. This is fantastic for our community. I can't tell you how excited we
We're
are.
thrilled to be here.
Yeah, not only in the community, Jackson Center, but doing a performance which we had to connect with. As I mentioned, we actually interviewed Abby Mann, and he is part of our world.
My name is Dylan Jones. I play Maria Vollner, Mrs. Halberstadt, and the waitress.
Okay.
My name is Shannon Holt, and I play Mrs. Berthold and Elsa Lindau, a cleaning woman.
And my name's Kip Gilman, and I play the head judge, Dan Hayward.
I'm Matthew Floyd Miller, and I play Oscar Rolf, the German defense attorney.
Maximilian Joe.
I'm Jeff Gardner. I play Rudolph Peterson and Captain Byers and Judge Norris.
There were 3 judges in the judge's trial.
Right.
3 for the trip.
Yeah.
Just Hayward.
And Hayward would have been probably a composite. What we do know,
I never found anything.
what we do know,
Haywood. You
Judge Haywood.
Haywood.
yeah, and what we do know is that Abby Mann, when we interviewed him, what did Jackson mean? I mean, Jackson meant everything to Abby Mann, and he used liberally in Spencer Tracy's certainly closing statement terminology that was in Jackson's opening statement at Nuremberg and Jackson's closing statement at Nuremberg.
Uh-huh.
And so if you listen to the two, you can see where he did that.
Yeah.
And then used throughout the Maximilian Schell character, Rolf, many of the defense counsel, I'm trying to think, he used, it was a Nuremberg defense counsel who he actually used some of the testimony and more during the Goering piece, which they just
took it from that first trial.
Yeah. Certainly it wasn't a complete transcription, but that was his inspiration for some of the terminology. But Tracy is the one that gets most of the Jackson language.
Right.
Which is
Yeah, the final.
finally, especially that,
Yeah, which is wonderful. Yeah.
And he says something verbatim. I was looking at a website, and he talked about when they talked about Schlegelberger. He even has some of that closing statement, which says, certainly he's a tragic figure, but our compassion for the present state of torture of his soul doesn't.
Forgetfulness of the torture and murder of millions by the government of which he was a part.
Yeah.
The tribunal found Schlegel Bayer a tragic character, one who lived the life of an intellect, the work of the scholar, but then surrendered this intellect and scholarship to Hitler in political ambition and for a measure of personal security. He was found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. His signature gave the courts the power to enforce the fog, what's this?
Night and fog.
Night and fog decree.
Nacht und Nebel.
Yeah, that's right, the NN decree. I was just thrown off by that. It was his idea to promote the final solution by giving half Jews the choice between undergoing castration or being relocated to a concentration camp.
What a decision.
Yeah, my character is one of the Germans that's deemed mentally incompetent, and his parents were also resistance, so they are not resistance, political
Or communists.
Communists, excuse me. The character of Montgomery Clift plays in the movie. I'm sure he's just a general sweep of all of those cases.
Rudolph Peterson. And Judge Oswald Rotheg was the public prosecutor of the People's Court in Berlin. So think Judge Freisler. You've seen movies of Judge Freisler screaming and yelling because they videotaped, or they videotaped.
Yeah. Listen
to me. They took movies of that trial. So after the attempt on the life of Hitler in 1944, the Wolf Slayer, the blowing up, which failed, and then they brought everybody in and tried everybody. They filmed it because they wanted it to be propaganda. Well, as it turned out, now when you look at it, you're just shocked at the screaming and yelling by Judge Freisler. There was no defense. It was just boom, 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 boom. And they showed it throughout Germany. Well, what happened was it sort of backfired because Bormann and other officials in Hitler saying, this guy's the worst judge in the world, because if you're thinking of a fair trial and you found evidence, all he did was accuse, and convict him. There was nothing, because it was the opposite of what they wanted to accomplish, which was a nice trial, which would present the evidence, would show that once you've had all this evidence, then you could be convicted and then hanged. So he just got hanged. I mean, it was just, but it's out there now. It's amazing. But so Rothag was the public defender prosecutor of the People's Court and the former Chief Justice of the Special Court in Nuremberg, a Nazi Party member since 1938, sentenced to death. He sentenced to death after a mere half-hour trial, 2 Polish girls accused of starting a fire. Sentenced a man to death because of behavior attributable to his Polish subhumanity. Sentenced to death for racial pollution and status of public enemy, a Jewish man for having sexual relations with a German girl. That's all.
Yeah.
Not a good guy.
Yeah, that was predominantly in the story. It's called the Feldenstein case, where the older Jewish man is accused of having slept with a 16-year-old girl.
Racial
That's who Dylan plays.
So can I just switch gears before, I don't know when we're going to run, I don't want to run out of time, but you've had a chance, you played this part, I'm going to just go right down here, just a sense, you play this Judgment in Nuremberg, this Abbey Man play, and you've now given it several times. What have you learned from this? You go from, it's an acting, but a sense of what the message is that you think the play portrays.
Well, for me as an actor, it's always important to find who it is that I'm speaking for. And I feel that in this play, I'm specifically speaking for the citizens. Both of the women, well, the 3 women that I play, they just happen to be in Germany at this time. And I feel that it's my job to speak for the heart of the women who were affected by everything that happened around them. To be able to relay that in a way that can reach people's hearts rather than their intellects, because the numbers and the arguing and the logic that is laden throughout the play, for me, my job is to pull down into the heart so that we can reach someone on another level. Because the play is so fascinating in the tenets of the arguments. It's the natural drama within the course of the play is so riveting. But for me, it's only when we get to these other people that you actually get the heart of the people who were living in that time. And for Mrs. Halberstadt in particular, she's the maid that works in the home that the Judge stays in. That one for me is I feel like I may be the only German you ever talk to in this way. I may be the only normal working class German you ever speak to that has a chance to tell you what it's like for us. And as a result, it just folds into where we are in the world today and the ever-present importance of standing up for what is right as it's happening, speaking up while you can. So that's what it has been for me.
Jackson, in his first trial, tried to make it clear in his opening statement that the trial was against individuals and not against the German people. Do you, as you play the character, do you sense that the trial that's going on, which is part of the play, is in fact against the German people?
I have 2 different characters who have a different opinion on that. Yeah. I think that the Maria Wallner case, where she is the young girl who the old Jew was sent to extermination because of the racial pollution that was supposed to have existed between us, I feel like everything is personal to her. Absolutely everything is personal to her because her life has been destroyed. And it isn't a far reach for me to look within our culture and our society today to see women being absolutely having their character assassinated. We still do it today. All you have to do is look at any date rape documents and you're going to see how women's character is assassinated over and over again. to, for the means of anything political or otherwise. So that role in particular, I have to try to not get so angry as an actor that I can stand up for what's right as a person. Because, you know, in those trials, she was the only woman who was in that room, short of the secretaries or the translators. She was the only woman in that room. And that, for me, carries an enormous amount of weight. Especially when people bring you into that room simply to just tear you apart.
Yeah. Terrific. All right, Shannon, your role.
My role.
Do you have more than one role, or just one role?
I have one role that I just do a second role, but just like a very short little scene as a cleaning lady. But my main role, as Mrs. Berthold, I'm a widow of a big Nazi general who has been hung 2 years before, he was in the trial before. So my function in the play is another woman, to give you more of the human side. However, I represent the side of denial, of not knowing. When I say repeatedly that I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know, even though my husband was a part of it. We both did not know how far it was going. And I just think that's a very interesting thing to explore as an actor. Because you have to find a way to justify that with your brain today and with the knowledge you have about what happened today. So that's been an interesting journey for me as an actor, and I try to work with that every time I do it, but it's getting deeper and deeper, I hope. But I have to say I can justify the way she justifies it in the play. The way I'm doing it actively is thinking she's forgetting about her, she's putting the past behind her, and she's looking forward. The German people wanted to look forward. They wanted to forget. So she's trying to go forward, and her role in doing that is being like a cultural ambassador now. She wants to make her city, Nuremberg, bring back the great image that it once had. Like, we're trying to rebuild our museums. We're doing this. And so I have a relationship with the judge in the play, friendship. It's very ambiguous, actually, in the play. But I'm trying to show him a side that we are not all monsters, I say, that we are good people at heart. You know, how could we didn't know that this was happening. And so I'm doing that in the play. That's what my function is, I think. But still grappling with the pain of losing my husband and what has happened. But she doesn't. She doesn't want to face it head on. So I don't know what else to say.
Is there a bar?
I don't want to tell everything.
I'm visualizing though in the movie.
In the movie.
Is there a restaurant scene where
yes,
they
we
go?
have
They
those
go?
scenes.
Okay.
We have a scene in the house and a scene at the
So
restaurant.
and it's you two guys, right?
Yes. But again, even I think in the movie, wasn't it a very ambiguous kind of relationship? You weren't really
No,
sure
that's right.
what was happening there, which I think is interesting on Abby Mann's part. That there's a hint of something, but you're not sure. But yeah, I think what I've learned doing it, just as a person, in anybody, that when you have talkbacks with people, that the younger people don't really know much about it, which to me is shocking because I learned about this in school. So it just makes me very sad that our public education system, which most of us went to public school, isn't spending time on this. Now, also, we talked about the other night the Japanese internment. Somebody brought that up, I think. That as well does get nothing in the textbooks, or nobody teaches about that. So that's what I'm just shocked by how we've how the education system, what's going on in our education system. I'm really shocked by that.
Well, you bring
That's kind of an eye-opener for me, that the younger people in colleges aren't familiar with this.
Yeah.
Let alone the internment. I mean, that happened in our own country. I'm shocked by that. So that's kind of opened up my eyes on the tour and upset me a lot. And also the fact that we as a country aren't allowed to show these graphic photos on the news. Iraq, Afghanistan. Remember when, didn't Bush say we couldn't even show the bodies coming home? And so when our audiences watch the film, I mean, I remember we did this in LA, people were weeping because they see the graphic video and the photos that some of them have never seen, like the younger people, but it's really immediate and emotional, more so than facts or, just seeing what people are doing to people and allowing it to be done. And like anything, education is key, so I just cannot believe that we are not teaching
Well, your
this in
character,
school.
you have this tragic speech pleading with me, the line at the end that you say,
Yeah.
the last few lines
Well-
that you say to the judge about we have to forget.
That's your way, we have to
We
move
have to
forward.
forget to move on. And
I
I
can't-
think
we
a lot
can't
of
live.
people, unfortunately, have bought into that, and bought into that here in the United States and in our school system. So that's, and a
Yeah.
reflection of that is how many kids don't know anything about it.
Crazy to me.
Well, let's move on. We've heard enough about it. Forget about it. It's too painful. We can do better, and let's not talk about it.
Or it doesn't exist anymore. That doesn't exist anymore. We don't want to speak about it. It's upsetting to people. We have an unspeakable history in our country that if we can allow ourselves to look at it, will help us relate to the rest of the world in some way. Because even this week we had somebody send us information about the sterilization laws in America, and how the Nazis had used that as inspiration for their sterilization laws. And it's like that,
There was
for
stuff
me,
going on in the 70s we're doing that.
yeah, it was the first time I'd heard about it.
All the
And
books in Virginia till
That means-
1972.
Yeah. I'm just like, wow.
anyway.
So you're the judge.
Yes.
You got to grapple with a lot of things. When sometime this tour will end, what do you think the walkaway will be for you?
Well, as you mentioned, this is a compilation of a bunch of characters. There's no one to kind of turn to specifically, except to me
Right.
and for myself. And this is me throwing myself into this guy, and it's something that I have been dealing with all my life, and a subject matter that I have been dealing with all my life that I was drawn to in musically. And political and social material that I read and have written over the years about responsibility, taking responsibility and not taking responsibility, and how easy it is to try to find an easy answer and look at the black and white. This character and the struggle that I have daily is to kind of try to find the gray rather than to point to this is wrong, this is right. And his struggle is to be as impartial in moving into this situation where he knows the pressure on him basically is convict these people immediately, let's move on. But the pressure he's getting basically from everybody, and the discomfort with asking questions. And it's stuff that I find in my life, which is, it's exciting and it's troubling, it's painful, talking to Shannon's character and feeling like I am an interrogator, and Dylan's character. They all feel like they're on trial when they're around me. If I'm just asking questions, I just want to know what went on, what you felt. And when I do that in life, as Kip, I feel I have all those same feelings when I'm dealing with things that are not talked about all the time. We don't talk about that. And I generally am, relentless about that, and can be, some people would say, obnoxious about that, where I will bring up stuff that people are uncomfortable. This is obviously his job. He wants to learn. So he's going there as a small town. It's presented that he is a district court judge in a small town. Tracy was from Maine. This character is supposed to be from South Carolina. So he's going there really innocent on some level. He's a sharp guy, but he is innocent. This, if you want to go back to what did really happen. And the struggle to be impartial, yet the struggle to then look at these men in the dock, admit that The United States is responsible. All these countries around the world, none of them were blameless, but those guys in that dock have to be found responsible for their acts, period. Are there others? And Benjamin Ferencz, who you know, would say the same thing. He'd say, certainly there were thousands of others, but he's going to go to the ones who were in the position, who had the education, and we have to find them guilty. And so it's an incredible release for me in a way, and it's painful in another way, in working on this role, because it is so much of how I approach, who I try to approach life, and I find myself being guilty often of looking and trying to find an easy answer to something when there really isn't. We have a political scene right now that's fraught with convolutions and black and white, and there's unbelievable amount of guilt on the part of everybody. And so that's it's not easy to kind of deal with. But it's exciting to play, because then I can hopefully hang it up at the end of the show and go get a pizza. And talk about the World Series. That's what we have as actors. We can get to do that. We can struggle with it for a while, but then we can move on in our lives. We have lives we have to deal with, but the gift is to be able to get involved in something that's very often more important than ourselves.
Thank you, that's great. So, and your role is really the Maximilian Schell. Just before you do that, when they did John Barrett, who'll be here tomorrow, and I want John to tell you the story. I want you to go up and see the guy who's in charge and the Robert Jackson biographer, because he was at it wasn't that long ago, where they did a Judgment at Nuremberg play, and Maximilian, they went to the preview. And Maximilian Schell played the defendant judge. He didn't play his role.
He played Yawning, I think, right?
Yeah. And he was, during the preview, he blew the lines. He segued back into his role as defense counsel. And he was embarrassed. But it was poignant, because he was redoing his role of 30 years earlier. He wasn't, all of a sudden, the lines, he just blew them. He used the lines of Schell, when he was defense counsel. And it was wonderfully poignant. Everybody there applauded afterwards, because you're seeing a superstar.
Because he got an
Academy Award winner
for it. Right,
yeah.
Academy Award for
Yeah, but he got caught up in the moment, and he wanted to say something as defense counsel as opposed to being Yanni. So, anyways, so how did you dive into this role? I mean, it's the Schell Academy Award. He's really one of the main characters of the play.
Yeah. Some actors might, there's some that say, I need to know everything I can find out about this play. Let me watch a previous production. I would venture to arrogantly suggest that probably 95% of actors in the world say, I don't want to know anything about, previous productions of the film. And I fall in that camp, and I have seen a million old movies, but I'd never seen Judgment at Nuremberg, and so I to this day have not seen Judgment at Nuremberg. I've seen little teeny clips. I saw a little clip of Maximilian Schell on YouTube for some other reason, and I went, oh, click, and I clicked away. Yeah, I love this role. I absolutely adore this role, and for the reason that he's a conflicted man who has really given himself a task that, probably, like we were talking about a little earlier, I would imagine maybe many attorneys in Germany at the time probably wouldn't necessarily jump up and say, I'll do that. Certainly for the military tribunal, but maybe even for the judge's trial. And also I love doing dialects. I get to do a German dialect, and that just whenever I get to do a dialect as an actor, it just tickles me, because I really enjoy doing dialects, and that's just an actor thing. And I watched a lot of World War II movies, so I get to pull out my boilerplate German accent. But apologies to the German people. But to jump off what Kip was saying, actually, the notion of responsibility that I say the word probably 20 times in the play. It just echoed over and over again: responsibility, responsibility, responsibility. And the character of men, something that I mentioned, quoting Oliver Wendell Holmes, and that those are the that's one of the bases for the determination of guilt or innocence, and yes, the notion of things are not black and white. I'm sitting here thinking, what am I going to say when it comes to my turn? And I find that I am. Though Dylan spoke about this the other night, and I agree with her. And we had a panel discussion in Richmond, Virginia, with a guy who was the head of the Holocaust Museum there, and he apparently, testified in SS trials, guys who fled to America and to hide, and he said something that someone had said before, that anybody in Germany, any regular citizens in Germany who feel extreme guilt about what happened during the Second World War, it's unnecessary guilt, because few people know what it's like to live under a totalitarian regime and what the terror that's involved in that. And I thought it was really a compassionate and profound perspective. But it's still hard for me to say, well, when some of these Germans say, I didn't know, it's because they didn't know. Some of them probably didn't know. Or so strongly in their heart believed that in their country that even if this Jew and this Pole, these people were disappearing, that, well, it can't be that horrible a thing that's happening to them wherever they went. And then there's, so it runs the gamut. Then there's folks who did know and pretended they didn't know, maybe the Mrs. Bertolds of the country. And so I get to watch my hero crumble before my very eyes, because Ernst Jani is my hero. I say that I followed your career since I was a boy at university and law school. You were one of the signers of the Weimar Constitution. I revere you, and I get in my imaginative biography, I stepped up to volunteer to defend this guy, because God damn it, he's not going to go down. He's not going to go down as one of these people. And so I get the horrible distinction of watching my hero crumble before my very eyes, and it's like watching my country crumble before my very eyes. Watching the notion of oh my God, my hero. I can relate it to being an American. If I see a politician that I like, or a figure that I like, an actor that I like, and I hear a story about something that they did, the pain that comes with the tarnishing of somebody's reputation and who they are as a human being, or who you thought they were, is hard to swallow sometimes. But it's an important lesson, because we go, oh, well, it's called being a human being. It's called being in a world where things aren't black and white. It's called being in a world where I'm going to say something really hard. There's a reason that we deal with terrorism in the Middle East, because, we have, military bases there. We have interest in oil there. I'm not saying that we deserve to be attacked in the slightest, but there's a reason for some of the aggression, unfortunately, that we incur, for example, I
was going to say, talk about the strength of what you think your presentation is in terms of your logic in this presentation, which I think is so important. And this is what the judge refers to at the end, saying you are a brilliant attorney and your use of logic particularly is brilliant.
Yeah.
Yet,
right.
Yet.
Because I had this wonderful speech toward the end of the play where I kind of connect all the pieces, specifically implicating the Allies, the Allied powers, the Russians, the British, and the Americans, specifically in the rise of the Third Reich, and by mentioning pacts that were signed, business deals that were done, words that were spoken, and consequently, how can you say that it was only those German people that were responsible for all these horrible things taking place because these guys did this, these guys did that, and these guys did, and that they hadn't? Well, there wouldn't have been a problem in the first place, or it would have been a lot harder for Hitler to have risen to power. If that's what you're
Yeah, and the judge acknowledges the truth in
right.
that. Yet,
And
logic doesn't make it right.
He says, yes, you're right, and we do hold them responsible, and we hold these guys responsible who signed these convictions and set these people off to be murdered. So it leaves me with that wonderful place to stand on, which is called loose ground, which means that I can't stand up and jump up and down as a patriot and say I'm right and you're wrong. Which when we get into, as you were speaking downstairs, when you start saying defending your ideology to the teeth, then you get some really scary territory if you're not careful. And I think that that's one of the issues, from my perspective, for example, in our political arena, where people don't want to think in a nuanced and complicated way. They want to say, it's this and it's this. They don't want to see that, if for no other reason than we have a massively multicultural society, that there's all kinds of different perspectives involved. So you can't just say, well, this is clearly the answer, and why didn't you do that? Well, because there's all these other people to consider as well. So it's a struggle, isn't it? All the time. What will I walk away with? I was saying to these kids in Gainesville the other day, it's like, we can be involved. I can be an involved person in my society. That's one of the joys of being an actor too. What we're doing right now in telling this story is, I think, a service, I hope, to people, to think about the notions of responsibility and what they can, how they can contribute, and how they can find compassion. I think it's massively important, compassion. And so I walk away thinking, as I have in other plays I've done, going, okay, how can I get off my ass and contribute to my society in a way that's compassionate, productive, and knowing that, I'm responsible. I'm not responsible for everything, but I have my little bit of responsibility. I have my little part to play. So, when I throw away a plastic bottle in a garbage can instead of recycling, I'm contributing to the floating mass of plastic rolling around in the ocean. So, that's it.
Yeah, and what the judge says at the end about the value of one human being, that the reality is one person, the value of their life, and one person can, in fact, make a difference. So if we can affect a few people who are there listening, affect ourselves to go out and do something, that's a lot.
It's just a quick segue. At this theater here, about 10 years ago, I used segments from Judgment at Nuremberg and Abby Mann's, some vignettes at an event honoring developmentally disabled children. Here are the value of a single human life. Yeah. That was the mantra. And so we tied a little bit of Jackson in and ultimately came down to that term. And that launched the whole day-long program. But yeah, no matter where it finds its place, that was I hadn't thought about that till right now. But yeah. So let's. You've been waiting so long and patiently. Good. So, what's your take on all of this? I mean, you have a role, but you've also heard the four of them talk about. Does your role had the same kind of impact on you?
Yeah, the role I play, which is Rudolf Peterson, he's been sterilized by the Nazis because he's deemed mentally incompetent, and his family are communists. That idea alone, just us talking about being here in this center, Jackson being the country judge or country lawyer, as I heard earlier, using practical common sense in this seems so obvious, that how you can discard like refuse a group of people, particularly even just starting with their own citizens, like having the Germans deem a group of people as mentally incompetent or handicapped, or people that you just don't want to waste or bother your time or your country, or just that alone to me is absolutely diabolical. I mean, I can't even imagine in our own country if you had said, yeah, well, these people are disabled, these people are, they're obviously people with Down syndrome, any number of things. We're just going to put them over here, send them into the ovens because we don't need them anymore. They're of no use to us. I mean, on a human level, like obviously, practically, just thinking about that, using common sense. What is that? How does a group of people, how did it come to that? It's mind-boggling to me. So playing Peterson, to me, it's about the human equation. I want to be able to relate that to this individual, because I can do all the research in the world about the time, about the trials, but for me, it's important to tell the story, the humanity of what's going on, or the inhumanity in this case. And so, playing Peterson is really eye-opening, because I guess I do like to live in the gray a lot. I do like to see both sides, but at a certain point, you just have to shake your head and go, how on earth could you have let this happen? And we were in the Virginia Holocaust Museum, and they had this amazing reproduction of the trial there, and they had all of the triangles listed with what each triangle was for each person that was sent to the camps. And I'm just sitting looking at this list, everything from gypsies and mentally incompetent prostitutes and Jehovah's Witnesses. Yeah, I mean, this entire list of people that were being discarded, and that to me is the biggest thing I'm taking away from this. It's just going, I can't believe this. I can't understand how this could happen. So going back earlier to what Shannon said, and I've seen this for myself. I work at a girls' school in Pasadena. It's an all-girls campus, and they don't have these images readily available to them in terms of, I mean, you certainly can access it, but in their classrooms. It's not the history that's being provided to the girls. And I keep wondering why that is, because we have incredible images that we've seen, today. I mean, we see these incredibly haunting, horrible images. So why are we not focusing on this as much as certainly I had growing up in my school? Why are we shy? What is it that we're doing by not putting this information out there for them to have a discussion, have a dialogue about? And I'm actually I'm confused. I'm really confused by that, because it doesn't make sense to me that what's going on, ISIS, Syria, and the things that we're seeing today, why that would be any different than what we're seeing 80 years ago, 70 to 80 years ago. I don't understand that equation. So I'm more, I guess, confused, leaving a little confused about it all.
People who are wiser than me have said the only way to peace is through dialogue. And it's in that necessary conversation of talking about the things that are impossible to find a way to talk about that we can find the humanity in each other. So if we aren't allowed to show what's happened or talk about things that upset people because we're past it now, then we are doomed to repeat the same thing.
Yeah.
Because there's no other way that we can make the healing for the people who acts of atrocity, criminal acts and atrocities have happened to. The only way that they can heal and move on is being able to be seen as the person that it affected. And if you eliminate the dialogue, that is impossible. One of the things that I have always been really struck by in the Rwandan genocide, that those trials were given to the villages because the villages are actually based around dialogue and the entire community coming together and having a conversation. And I was reminded of that when we were at the Holocaust Museum, because they mentioned the trials and said it was given to the villages to deal with their own people. And that was something when I had been researching that, was so taken by the idea of smaller communities being able to govern themselves and being able to find responsibility themselves as to how they were each, the idea here in America is that each state can decide what is correct for them. Those things don't always work right. It doesn't always work that way. But at the core of it really is the idea that dialogue is the only way to peace and healing.
I was thinking about that. I was thinking about a marquee on a church that I saw a number of years ago. I was driving by, and the sermon for that particular day was how to set the table for your enemy. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, okay, there it is. How to create an environment where you could have a dialogue. But the other thing that it hit me is the remnants of what is still going on in our country to do. You talk about value of one person, value of a human being. In Germany, the whole idea of strength and the body and the healthy men and these powerful men and the Aryan youth. What do we have today in our country and throughout the world? Then the magazines, glorification of what someone is supposed to look like, but whether a man or a woman. And it's not saying you should discard anyone who doesn't, but it's informing in a horrible way people who don't look that way, that they are forgotten, that they shouldn't be looked at in the same respectful way. So
yeah, we just do it much more subliminally now, but you can argue that the effect is even much greater because people take it on for themselves. They take it on to eradicate themselves. Oh, I don't actually belong in this world because I don't look like that. I don't have value because we just handed it into people to be the arbiters for themselves.
Wow. This is fantastic. You touch a few chords, and can I talk to you for a second? Mm-hmm. Because wonderfully hit things which we talked about today, wonderfully talked about things which we are a part of here at the Jackson Center, because we firmly believe that dialogue is incredibly important. Rwanda, truth and reconciliation. And that is a concept which really came out of South Africa. Shortly after the apartheid was ended, the chief judge who really made that happen was a guy named Richard Goldstone, who subsequently became the chief prosecutor at the Yugoslavia Tribunal and the Rwanda Tribunal. He was the first one. And now that the Rwanda Tribunal, which was actually tried those most responsible, that's the top people, but they can't try everybody. And so they created this environment, which you just talked about, of trying to have truth and reconciliation. It's a tough process, but the template came from Richard Goldstone and a group at South Africa. Quick vignette, because my head's exploding with stuff that are probably useless information, but Richard Goldstone, who was the first chief prosecutor of an international tribunal since Jackson. Jackson, as you know, left the court to become chief prosecutor. Left the Supreme Court, took a leave of absence. So, first trial, United Nations create is Yugoslavia. All the things that happened, Milosevic, Karadzic and all of that stuff. So they're looking for a chief prosecutor, had a hard time. So they kind of went through a list and it got down and they asked Nelson Mandela, who was president at the time, if he had any ideas. He goes, well, the white chief judge, Richard Goldstone, would be perfect. So I'll ask him. So Chief Goldstone was asked if he would become the chief prosecutor of the first trial since Nuremberg. And he says, I can't, to Nelson Mandela. Why not? Because the Constitution says I cannot. If I'm the chief judge, I cannot take on another position without resigning it, and I really want to be chief judge. He goes, has that ever happened before? Yes. Robert Jackson. Robert Jackson in the United States took a leave of absence. How did he? Well, was he able to? Well, it's not constitutionally prohibited. So then Nelson Mandela says, what if I get the Constitution changed? Will you do it? And he said yes, he did, and Goldstone, the rest is history, which ultimately found its way into the fact that the Rwandan legacy of that trial is the Truth and Reconciliation, which you just talked about. Japanese internment, you talked about that. That's the key case in that is Korematsu. Korematsu versus the United States, of which the constitutionality of the Order 966, or 1966, by Roosevelt was an executive order. That's what happened, executive order, which created these internment camps, really concentration camps. And Korematsu, who was an American, born, just happened to have Japanese ancestry. He voted in the United States, he had a car, girlfriends, everything. But he was told he had to go there, and he says, I'm not going to do it. So ultimately he went there, ultimately challenged the case. We had Korematsu here. Fred Korematsu sat in that chair right there. It was cool. He's just the nicest, most demure guy, but he wanted to test it. He tested it and went to the court. He lost. He was a convicted felon. And the dissent of that dissenting opinion was Jackson, which was remarkable because Jackson was appointed by Roosevelt. So you think politics aside, where the rule of law prevails, and that's one of the most important cases in the United States is the Korematsu dissent, which now it would never be followed, but it's still on the books. It's still on the books. And I got a quick story because we had Karen Korematsu, the daughter, sitting right there, and I was interviewing her, and I said, how did you know about it? How did you know about it? Well, that's an interesting story, Greg, because what happened was we were studying civics in California, San Francisco, and all of a sudden one day my friend came home and said, hey, I just was learning about these things during World War II called internment camps, and they had Korematsu versus the United States was this case mentioned. Is that any relation to you, Karen? This is high school. And Karen goes, beats me. So she went home for dinner that night. Said, hey, my friend, Sally, mentioned this case that she was studying called Korematsu versus the United States. Do we have any, is that part of our family lineage, you know? And you could see mother kind of rolled her eyes and said, Fred, maybe you should talk to Karen. And so that was the first time Fred said, I'm Korematsu. And here's what happened. And the reason was that Japanese tend not to talk about that. We've had programs here.
There was a lot of shame, I heard.
Part of it, and part of it's just that they just internalized. And so we've had other internment camp people here, and their siblings, or their children, and they just never talked about it. So you can imagine Karen, this is a monumental Supreme Court case, Korematsu versus the United States, which you hear about. And that was him. That's how she learned.
Wow.
And subsequently, she's on the hustings now that her dad is tied to talk about Korematsu. You talk about the value of a single life. Do you have time? Are you okay?
We really probably should wrap it up pretty soon.
Okay, let me.
I don't know where the other two actors are.
I think they left. I think they found their ways back. But
I will try to.
I'm having a great time as well. But
And I don't. I've taken full advantage of this. I'm exploiting you.
No.
But the value of a single life. We talked about concentration camps. So we talked about the Jehovah's Witness, and we talked about that they were the first group in Germany that was put into concentration camps, specifically Dachau. Dachau was just that, concentrating political dissidents. Jehovah's Witness were the first. And Jehovah's Witness found form here in the United States because of that persecution in concentration camps, because they knew the Nazis, their salute, of course, was the Heil Hitler. And the United States, when we did the Pledge of Allegiance, you may not know this, but it was a hand over the heart and it sort of extended out like this. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. And so the Jehovah's Witness from on high, they said, we're not going to, during the flag salute, we're going to stand reverently, but we're not going to make a statement, and we're not going to certainly say the pledge. It was a religious tenet. Well, that found its way to the Supreme Court. That found its way into a case in Pennsylvania called Gobitis, where in fact it was ruled a mandatory flag salute was constitutional. Constitutional. And then all hell broke loose in the United States against Jehovah's Witnesses. There was hangings, there was castrations, things you just didn't fully appreciate. This could happen here. And then 3 years later, same case, now in West Virginia, Barnett versus West Virginia, the case came up again. During that time period, Jackson joined the court. There were a couple of people who actually decided to flip. And Jackson wrote the opinion, and it's probably the most famous opinion by Jackson, and probably the most famous opinion, according to constitutional law scholars, in the history of the Supreme Court, because of how he termed human rights, and it can't be affected by political constitution. In fact, when you go out the flagpole, take a quick look, you'll see it. You'll see Barnett
Can't be
quotes it.
affected by elections.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's Jackson. And so you had Jehovah's Witness, you have Korematsu, you have these things here, and most importantly, you're playing tomorrow a play which is a direct legacy of the Nuremberg trial, because that came directly down. So I applaud you and I thank you, and this has been terrific for that.
Thank you for having us.
It's an honor to be here.
I'm so glad to have all this.
Yeah, thank you.